I will stand for him." Every head in the courtroom turned at once, all eyes landing on the sharp, unshaken voice, utterly unexpected. A young black woman stood at the back of the packed Manhattan courtroom. Her apron was still tied around her waist, marking her as clearly out of place among the sea of expensive suits. Sweat glistened on her forehead from her hurried journey across town. She clutched a worn leather portfolio to her chest, her knuckles white with determination. Some laughed, some scoffed, a few pulled out their phones to record. "Who is she?" someone whispered. "Probably the housekeeper," another voice sneered. "What's next?" "The janitor taking the bench." Laughter rippled through the gallery, but Eleanor Thompson didn't flinch. At 34, she had spent 12 years invisible in the shadows of wealth and privilege, had endured her share of condescension, but never had she felt the sting more sharply than in this moment, when everything she'd worked for, everything she believed in, hung in the balance of a single act of courage. Before we start, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's continue. The alarm buzzed at 4:47 a.m. in the cramped studio apartment on 125th Street in Harlem, but Eleanor Thompson was already awake. She always was. Her internal clock had been calibrated by 12 years of arriving at the Bennett mansion before the family stirred, before the morning light touched the towering windows of their Upper East Side fortress. Eleanor swung her legs over the edge of the narrow bed, her bare feet finding the cold hardwood floor. At 34, she moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned that invisibility was both survival and art. Her reflection in the cracked mirror showed that held secrets no one had ever bothered to ask about. She pulled her thick black hair into a simple bun, the same style she'd worn every day for over a decade. The November morning air bit through her wool coat as she stepped onto the subway platform at 125th Street. The 6 train rumbled into the station, packed with early commuters heading downtown. Eleanor found her usual spot near the doors, pulled out a worn paperback, To Kill a Mockingbird, and lost herself in Atticus Finch's Closing Arguments. She'd read this book 17 times, but today the words felt different somehow, electric with possibilities she couldn't name. 23 minutes later, she emerged from the 77th Street station into a different world. The tree-lined streets of the Upper East Side gleamed with fresh snow from the previous night. Doormen in pristine uniforms nodded respectfully as she passed, recognizing the woman who had walked these same blocks every morning for 12 years. They knew her face but not her name, her routine but not her dreams. The Bennett mansion stood like a monument to old money at the corner of East 78th and 5th Avenue. 5 stories of limestone and marble, with windows that caught the morning sun like jewels. Eleanor used her key at the service entrance, as she had every morning since Robert Bennett hired her in December 2011, when she was 22 and desperate for work that would pay enough to support her teenage brother. The kitchen smelled of yesterday's dinner party, remnants of wealth that Eleanor would quietly erase before the family woke. She tied her apron around her waist and began her ritual. Coffee first, dark and strong the way Mr. Bennett preferred it. Then she'd prepare breakfast for whatever combination of family members happened to be in residence. As the coffee brewed, Eleanor allowed herself a moment to look out the kitchen window at Central Park. Snow dusted the bare branches of ancient oaks, and early joggers traced paths through the winter landscape. She thought about her brother Marcus, now 26 and working as a paramedic in Chicago, and felt the familiar warmth of pride mixed with exhaustion. Everything she'd sacrificed had been worth it to see him graduate, to see him save lives. The soft chime of the service elevator announced the arrival of someone from upstairs. Eleanor straightened, slipping seamlessly into her professional demeanor. But instead of Mrs. Bennett's imperious voice or one of the children's casual demands, she heard the heavy footsteps she'd learned to recognize over the years. Robert Bennett appeared in the kitchen doorway, and Eleanor immediately sensed something was wrong. At 48, He usually carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never faced a problem money couldn't solve. His silver-touched dark hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit immaculate, but there were shadows under his green eyes that she'd never seen before. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," Eleanor said softly, pouring his coffee into the bone china cup he preferred. "You're up early." He accepted the coffee with a distracted nod, his usual polite smile absent. "Couldn't sleep. Big day ahead." He paused, studying her face with an intensity that made her suddenly self-conscious. "Eleanor, how long have you been with our family?" 12 years this December, sir." 12 years. He repeated the words as if testing their weight. "You've seen this family through a lot, haven't you? Graduations, holidays, celebrations, difficult times." Eleanor nodded carefully. She had indeed seen it all. Mrs. Bennett's struggles with prescription pills, their daughter's eating disorder, their son's rebellion and eventual redemption. She had been the silent witness to their humanity, the keeper of secrets they didn't even know she held. "Mr. Bennett, is everything all right?" For a moment, his composed facade cracked, and she glimpsed something raw and vulnerable underneath. "I hope so, Eleanor. I really hope so." What kind of trouble could a man like Robert Bennett possibly face? Eleanor wondered, but she simply refilled his coffee and returned to her morning routine. Meanwhile, 20 blocks south in the glass towers of Midtown, Robert's world was indeed crumbling. The fraud investigation that had been simmering for months was reaching a boiling point. Anonymous whistleblowers, questionable accounting practices at his charitable foundation, missing funds that Robert swore he knew nothing about. It was all coming to a head today in Judge Patricia Calloway's courtroom. The irony wasn't lost on him. For 25 years, he'd built his reputation on philanthropy. The Bennett Foundation had funded schools in underserved communities, provided scholarships for students who reminded him of his own humble beginnings in small-town Ohio. He genuinely tried to use his inherited wealth for good, to honor the memory of his father who'd taught him that privilege came with responsibility. Now, someone had systematically embezzled over $40 million from the foundation, and all evidence pointed to Robert himself. His team of high-powered attorneys from Whitman, Sterling, and Associates had been confident, assuring him that their reputation and connections would see him through. But yesterday's emergency meeting had changed everything. "The optics are too bad, Robert," his lead attorney, Charles Whitman, had said with cold professionalism. "Our firm can't be associated with this level of exposure. We're withdrawing from representation." "You're abandoning me?" Robert had asked, genuinely shocked. "After 15 years? We're protecting our interests, just as you should protect yours. Find yourself a criminal defense attorney. You're going to need one." Back in the mansion's kitchen, Eleanor noticed the way Mr. Bennett's hands trembled slightly as he set down his coffee cup. She developed an instinct for reading the emotional weather of the Bennett household, and today felt like a gathering storm. "Eleanor," he said suddenly, "what do you know about loyalty?" The question caught her off guard. "Sir, in your experience, what makes someone stand by another person when things get difficult?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. She thought about her brother, about the promises she'd made to their dying mother, about the choice to put someone else's needs before her own dreams. "I think loyalty isn't really about the other person, Mr. Bennett. It's about who you choose to be. When you make a commitment to someone, you're really making a commitment to yourself, to be the kind of person who keeps their word." Robert studied her face with newfound interest. "That's remarkably wise. My mother used to say that our character is tested not when things are easy, but when they're impossible." "Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was." Eleanor's voice carried a note of deep love and loss. "She taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply show up." As Robert headed toward what might be the most devastating day of his life, Eleanor's words echoed in his mind. Show up. Sometimes that was all anyone could do. Neither of them knew that by day's end, those words would transform both their lives forever. The federal courthouse on Pearl Street buzzed with anticipation as news crews positioned their cameras outside. By 9:30 a.m., Robert Bennett's case had already become the scandal du jour, with reporters eager to watch another wealthy philanthropist's fall from grace. Eleanor hadn't planned to be there. After Mr. Bennett left the mansion that morning, his usual confident stride replaced by something that looked almost like defeat, she'd found herself unable to concentrate on her daily tasks. She dusted the same mahogany table 3 times, reorganized the already perfect linen closet, and scrubbed spotless countertops until her hands were raw. Something Mrs. Bennett had said during a phone call that morning kept echoing in Eleanor's mind. He's going to court alone, Patricia. His own lawyers abandoned him yesterday. Can you believe it? After everything we've paid them over the years. Alone. The word had hit Eleanor like a physical blow. In 12 years, she'd never seen Mr. Bennett truly alone. He was always surrounded by advisors, family members, staff, sycophants. But today, when it mattered most, he would face his accusers with no one standing beside him. By 11:15 a.m., Eleanor found herself on the subway heading downtown, still wearing her navy work dress and sensible shoes. She'd left a note for Mrs. Bennett claiming a family emergency, not entirely a lie, since the Bennett family had become the only family she'd known for over a decade. The courtroom was packed when Eleanor slipped through the heavy oak doors. She recognized the vultures immediately. Reporters with their predatory smiles, business rivals who'd come to witness Robert's downfall, and curious socialites treating the proceedings like theater. Eleanor found a seat in the back, her heart pounding as she spotted Robert sitting alone at the defendant's table. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the vast courtroom and the weight of accusation. His usually immaculate appearance was perfect as always, but Eleanor could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the edge of the table like a lifeline. Judge Patricia Calloway entered with the authority of someone who'd spent 30 years sorting truth from lies. At 62, she was known for her no-nonsense approach and her particular disdain for wealthy defendants who thought money could buy justice. Mr. Bennett, Judge Calloway's voice cut through the courtroom's murmur. I understand your legal representation from Whitman, Sterling and Associates has withdrawn from this case? Robert stood slowly, his voice steady despite everything. Yes, Your Honor. They withdrew yesterday evening. And do you have alternative representation prepared? The silence stretched like a held breath. Eleanor watched Robert's jaw tighten as he faced the reality of his situation. No, Your Honor. I'm currently seeking new counsel. A wave of whispers swept through the gallery. Judge Calloway's expression darkened. Mr. Bennett, you are facing federal fraud charges involving $43 million in misappropriated charitable funds. These are serious allegations that could result in 25 years in federal prison. The court cannot proceed with today's preliminary hearing without proper representation. Eleanor felt her chest tighten. 25 years. The number seemed impossible, monstrous. Your Honor, the prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s named Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Morrison, rose from her seat. The government objects to any further delays. Mr. Bennett has had months to secure adequate representation. His lawyer's withdrawal, likely due to the overwhelming evidence against their client, should not halt these proceedings. Judge Calloway nodded grimly. Mr. Bennett, I'm prepared to postpone these proceedings for exactly 72 hours to allow you to secure representation. However, I'm also prepared to appoint a public defender if you cannot afford private counsel. A cruel laugh echoed from the gallery, one of Robert's business rivals enjoying the spectacle of a billionaire being offered a public defender. Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. Furthermore, Judge Calloway continued, Given the flight risk assessment and the serious nature of these charges, I'm revoking your bail pending this hearing. You'll be remanded to federal custody until— Your Honor. The voice that cut through the courtroom was clear, strong, and completely unexpected. Eleanor realized with shock that it was her own voice. She was standing, though she couldn't remember making the decision to rise. Every head in the courtroom turned toward her. The sudden silence was deafening. Judge Calloway's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me, ma'am. You're in the gallery. Please sit down." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice remained steady. "Your Honor, with respect, I believe I have the right to address the court." "You most certainly do not. Bailiff, I will stand for him." The words came out louder than Eleanor intended, echoing off the courtroom's high ceilings. "Your Honor, I will stand for Mr. Bennett." The courtroom erupted. Reporters' cameras swiveled toward Eleanor, their flashes creating a strobe effect. Spectators twisted in their seats, straining to see the woman who'd just shocked Manhattan's legal establishment. Robert spun around, his face a mask of disbelief and something that might have been hope. "Order!" Judge Calloway's gavel crashed down repeatedly. "Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but you cannot simply volunteer to represent a defendant in federal court. Please sit down before I hold you in contempt." Eleanor remained standing, her hands trembling but her voice growing stronger. "Your Honor, my name is Eleanor Thompson. I have been employed by the Bennett family for 12 years. I know this man's character better than anyone in this courtroom. Character witness testimony is not. I'm not offering to be a character witness, Your Honor." Eleanor's voice cut through the chaos with surprising authority. "I'm offering to represent Mr. Bennett as his attorney." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Judge Calloway stared at Eleanor as if she'd suddenly sprouted wings. Robert's mouth had fallen open. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her fingers frozen over the keys. "Ma'am," Judge Calloway said slowly, "are you an attorney licensed to practice law in the state of New York?" Eleanor's throat felt dry as sand, but she lifted her chin. "Yes, Your Honor, I am." Another explosion of noise from the gallery. This time, Judge Calloway didn't even try to restore order immediately. She simply stared at Eleanor, her sharp judicial mind trying to process this impossible turn of events. Robert was on his feet now, his eyes locked on Eleanor's face. In 12 years, he'd never really seen her. Not truly. She'd been furniture to him, part of the household machinery that kept his life running smoothly. But now, standing in that crowded courtroom with every eye upon her, she seemed to glow with an inner strength he'd never noticed. "You're telling this court," Judge Calloway said when the noise died down, "that you are a licensed attorney who has been working as a housekeeper for 12 years? "Yes, Your Honor." "And you're prepared to represent Mr. Bennett in federal court, on federal fraud charges, starting immediately?" Eleanor thought of her brother Marcus, of the promises she'd made, of the dreams she'd buried to keep others afloat. She thought of Robert's trembling hands that morning, of his question about loyalty, of his father's lessons about privilege and responsibility. "Yes, Your Honor, I am." Judge Calloway leaned back in her chair, studying Eleanor with the intensity of a hawk examining prey. "Ms. Thompson, are you aware that federal fraud cases require extensive knowledge of financial law, RICO statutes, and federal criminal procedure?" "I am aware, Your Honor." "And you feel qualified to provide Mr. Bennett with adequate representation?" Eleanor's voice didn't waver. "I feel qualified to provide Mr. Bennett with loyal representation, Your Honor. Something he apparently hasn't had until now." The barb was subtle but effective. Several spectators in the gallery winced, and Judge Calloway's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. Ms. Thompson approached the bench. "Mr. Bennett, you as well." As Eleanor walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, she felt the weight of every stare, every whispered comment, every flash from the cameras. But she also felt something else, a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in 12 years. Robert fell into step beside her, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he didn't feel alone. When they reached the bench, Judge Calloway leaned forward, her voice low but carrying clearly in the hushed courtroom. "Ms. Thompson, I need to see your bar certification before I can allow this proceeding to continue." Eleanor reached into her purse and withdrew a folder she'd carried every day for 8 years but never expected to use. Inside was her New York State bar certification, dated December 15, 2015. Judge Calloway examined the document carefully, then looked up at Eleanor with newfound respect. "Columbia Law School. Top 10% of your class. Passed the bar on your first attempt." She paused. "And you've been cleaning houses for 8 years?" "I've been taking care of people, Your Honor. It's what I do." Robert stared at the certification in Judge Calloway's hands, his mind reeling. Eleanor, his Eleanor, who made his coffee every morning and knew how he liked his eggs, was a Columbia-trained attorney who had been hiding in plain sight for nearly a decade. "Mr. Bennett," Judge Calloway turned to him, "are you prepared to accept Ms. Thompson as your legal counsel?" Robert looked at Eleanor, really looked at her, for the first time in 12 years. He saw the intelligence blazing in her dark eyes, the determination set in her jaw, the quiet strength that had been there all along, waiting for someone to notice. "Yes, Your Honor," he said quietly. "I can't think of anyone I'd trust more." The media circus outside the courthouse was unlike anything Eleanor had ever experienced. As she and Robert emerged from the federal building, camera flashes exploded like lightning, and reporters surged forward with the hunger of sharks scenting blood. "Ms. Thompson, Ms. Thompson, how long have you been practicing law in secret?" "Mr. Bennett, did you know your housekeeper was an attorney? Is this a publicity stunt?" Robert's security detail formed a protective barrier, but Eleanor felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she'd never experienced during her invisible years. She pulled her wool coat tighter around herself, suddenly aware of how her simple navy dress and sensible shoes contrasted with the designer suits surrounding them. They climbed into Robert's black Mercedes in silence, the tinted windows finally providing refuge from the chaos outside. As the car pulled away from the courthouse, Robert turned to study Eleanor's profile. She was staring out the window, her jaw set with determination, but he could see the slight tremor in her hands. "Eleanor." His voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Look at me." She turned, meeting his green eyes for the first time as equals rather than employer and employee. The shift felt seismic. "Why?" he asked simply. She knew what he meant. Why reveal herself? Why risk everything? Why sacrifice her carefully constructed invisibility for him? "Because 12 years ago, when I was 22 and desperate, you gave me a chance without asking questions," she said quietly. "You trusted me with your family, your home, your most private moments. Today, I'm returning that trust." Robert shook his head, running his hands through his silver-touched hair. "But you're a lawyer, Eleanor. A Columbia-trained lawyer. Why were you cleaning my house when you could have been?" "Could have been what?" Her voice carried an edge he'd never heard before. "Making partner at some white shoe firm? Fighting for clients who see me as a diversity hire rather than a person? You think the legal world was waiting with open arms for a black woman from Harlem whose mother died of cancer and who had to drop out of school to raise her teenage brother?" The words hung between them like a challenge. Robert felt the comfortable assumptions of his privileged world shifting beneath him. "I tried the traditional path first," Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger. "After I graduated law school, I sent out over 200 resumes. You want to know how many callbacks I got? 17. You know how many job offers? 3. All from firms that wanted to check their diversity boxes by hiring someone they could underpay and overwork until I burned out or quit. Eleanor's hands were no longer trembling. The anger that had been buried for 8 years was finally surfacing, clean and sharp as broken glass. I took a position at Morrison, Clark and Associates. 60-hour weeks, impossible caseloads, and a salary that barely covered my student loans while Marcus was still in high school. When my mother got diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, I asked for time off to care for her. They told me my career advancement would suffer if I wasn't fully committed to the firm. Robert felt something cold settle in his stomach. What did you do? I chose family. I quit the law to take care of my dying mother and finish raising my brother. When she passed 6 months later, I had medical bills that bankruptcy couldn't touch and a 17-year-old boy who needed stability more than I needed a career. The Mercedes pulled up to the Bennett mansion, but neither of them moved to get out. The familiar limestone facade looked different somehow, as if Eleanor's revelation had shifted the very foundation of reality. So you became a housekeeper, Robert said, understanding beginning to dawn. I became whatever I needed to be to survive and make sure Marcus could go to college. Your family paid well, offered health insurance, and let me live my life without questions. I thought it would be temporary, maybe a year or two until I could get back on my feet. But 12 years. Eleanor's laugh was bitter. Have you ever tried to explain an 8-year gap in your legal career? Sorry I've been out of the law, but I was busy keeping other people's lives together while mine fell apart. That doesn't exactly scream, hire me for partner track. Robert stared at his hands, shame washing over him in waves. All this time, you were qualified to be sitting across from me in boardrooms, not serving me coffee. I was exactly where I needed to be, Eleanor said firmly. Marcus graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern. He's a paramedic now, saving lives in Chicago. Every day I spent invisible in your house was a day he got to chase his dreams instead of worrying about survival. The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of missed understanding. Finally, Robert spoke. Eleanor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. She nodded. Do you believe I'm guilty? Eleanor studied his face, the man she'd watched for 12 years, who she'd seen comfort his children through nightmares, who donated anonymously to families in crisis, who treated every staff member with consistent respect even when he thought no one was watching. No, she said without hesitation. You're not guilty of fraud, but you are guilty of something else. Robert's eyebrows rose. What? You're guilty of trusting the wrong people. You're guilty of assuming that expensive lawyers and prestigious firms automatically mean competence and loyalty. You're guilty of not paying attention to the people closest to you who might have seen the warning signs. Her words stung because they were true. You saw warning signs? Eleanor nodded slowly. Your accountant, Gerald Hoffman. I've been cleaning his office during your home meetings for 3 years. I've seen him palm documents when he thought no one was looking. I've watched him redirect your attention away from certain line items in the foundation reports. I've noticed discrepancies between what he tells you and what's actually in the files. Robert felt the blood drain from his face. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was the help, Robert. Eleanor's use of his first name felt startling, intimate. When was the last time you asked for my opinion on anything more complex than dinner preferences? When did you ever indicate that my thoughts on your business dealings would be welcome or valued? The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. In 12 years, he'd never once considered that the quiet woman who moved through his house might have insights worth hearing. He'd been surrounded by advisors and consultants, paying millions for expertise while ignoring the brilliant mind that observed his life more closely than anyone. My God, he whispered. You could have prevented this entire mess. Maybe. Or maybe I would have been dismissed as an overstepping employee who didn't know her place. Eleanor's voice carried years of accumulated frustration. The same way I'm probably about to be dismissed now. Robert turned to face her fully. What do you mean? Robert, be realistic. I just announced in federal court that I'm your attorney. By tomorrow, every newspaper in the country will be running stories about the billionaire and his secret lawyer housekeeper. Your social circle will be scandalized. Your family will be humiliated. Your remaining business partners will question your judgment. She was right, and they both knew it. Robert's phone had been buzzing constantly during the car ride. Undoubtedly messages from board members, family friends, and business associates all demanding explanations for the spectacle at the courthouse. And when this is over, Eleanor continued, when we've cleared your name and restored your reputation, what then? Do I go back to making your coffee and pretending I never went to law school? Do we pretend this never happened? The question hung between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Their relationship had been fundamentally altered in the space of a single morning, and there was no roadmap for navigating the aftermath. Robert's phone buzzed again, and this time he glanced at it. The message was from his daughter Catherine. Dad, what the hell is happening? Call me immediately. They're all going to resist this, Robert said quietly. My family, my friends, my business associates. They're going to pressure me to get real representation and let you disappear back into anonymity. Eleanor nodded. I know. And you're prepared for that? Eleanor thought of her brother Marcus, of the promises she'd made to her dying mother, of the 12 years she'd spent being strong for everyone except herself. I'm prepared to fight for you the same way I've been fighting for the people I love my entire life, she said. The question is, are you prepared to let me? The next morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Eleanor's face was plastered across the front page of the New York Post under the headline, Help Wanted, Billionaire's Secret Lawyer Maid. The Times was more restrained but no less devastating. Bennett Foundation fraud case takes unusual turn as housekeeper claims legal credentials. Eleanor stood in her Harlem apartment, staring at the newspapers spread across her small kitchen table. Her phone had been ringing since 5 a.m., reporters, old law school classmates, and neighbors all demanding explanations she wasn't sure she could give. At 7:30 a.m., her buzzer rang. She looked out the window to see Robert's Mercedes idling at the curb, looking as out of place on 125th Street as a diamond in a coal mine. Robert himself stood at her building's entrance, holding 2 coffee cups and what appeared to be every major newspaper in the city. We need to talk, he said when she opened the door. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and his eyes were rimmed with red. He'd clearly slept as little as she had. Eleanor's studio apartment had never felt smaller than it did with Robert Bennett standing in it. His tall frame seemed to absorb all the available space, making her acutely aware of the modest surroundings. The Murphy bed folded against the wall, the tiny kitchenette, the single window that faced the fire escape. Nice place, he said, and she couldn't tell if he was being sincere or polite. It serves its purpose. Eleanor accepted the coffee gratefully. I assume you've seen the papers. Robert set his stack of newspapers on her small table. All of them, plus about 50 phone calls from reporters, 12 messages from board members, and one very colorful voicemail from my ex-wife questioning my sanity. Eleanor winced. I'm sorry. I knew this would complicate your life, but I didn't anticipate. Eleanor. Robert's voice was firm. Stop apologizing. You stood up for me when everyone else ran for the hills. Whatever complications come from that, we'll face them together. The word together hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to examine. About that, Eleanor said carefully, I need you to understand what we're up against. I've been out of active practice for 8 years. I know the law, but courtroom procedure has evolved. Discovery protocols have changed. I'll need to get up to speed fast, and I'll need resources. Robert pulled out his phone. Whatever you need. Money, research assistance, access to legal databases. It's not that simple. Eleanor sat down at her tiny table, gesturing for him to take the only other chair. Your former legal team has already poisoned the well. They've told everyone who'll listen that you're desperate and unstable, represented by unqualified counsel. Judge Calloway is going to scrutinize every motion I file with a microscope. So what do we do? Eleanor opened her laptop, a 3-year-old model she'd saved months to afford. We work. We work harder and smarter than anyone expects. We use the fact that they're underestimating us as an advantage. For the next 4 hours, they transformed Eleanor's modest apartment into a war room. Robert sat on her floor, surrounded by foundation documents and financial records, while Eleanor cross-referenced everything against federal regulations and precedent cases. Look at this, Eleanor said, highlighting a section of the Foundation's charter. Your accountant, Gerald Hoffman, had signing authority for transactions under $50,000. But these disbursements... She pointed to a series of entries. They're all $49,900. Just under the threshold. Robert leaned closer, his shoulder brushing against hers as he studied the screen. Eleanor felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with legal strategy. That can't be coincidental, Robert said. It's not. He was systematically embezzling just under the reporting threshold to avoid triggering automatic reviews. And look at the dates. They all correspond with times when you were traveling for the Foundation's overseas projects. Robert's jaw tightened. He used my absences to cover his tracks. Exactly. But here's the beautiful part. His greed made him predictable. If we can prove this pattern, we can show the court that you were deliberately deceived by someone in a position of trust. They worked through lunch, ordering Chinese takeout that they ate straight from the containers while poring over evidence. Eleanor watched Robert adapt to her world with surprising grace, sitting cross-legged on her worn carpet, using legal pads balanced on his knees, drinking coffee from her mismatched mugs. You know, Robert said around 3 p.m., I've never actually worked like this before. What do you mean? In my world, I make decisions and other people implement them. I've never sat on the floor of a studio apartment eating lo mein while building a legal strategy from scratch. He paused. It's invigorating. Eleanor smiled despite herself. Welcome to how the other half lives. Is this how you put yourself through law school? This and worse. I wrote my law review article in a 24-hour laundromat because it was the only place with reliable Wi-Fi and heat during a particularly brutal winter. Robert studied her face. You're extraordinary, you know that? The compliment caught Eleanor off guard. She'd spent so many years being invisible that being truly seen felt almost overwhelming. I'm just stubborn, she said, deflecting. No, you're brilliant. And tenacious. And... Robert stopped himself, as if realizing he was about to cross a line. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Eleanor's phone rang, breaking the spell. Marcus, she said, seeing her brother's name on the screen. I should take this. Eleanor. Marcus's voice was urgent. I've been seeing the news coverage. Are you okay? Do you need me to come to New York? I'm fine, Marcus. Really? You're representing a billionaire in a federal fraud case after spending 12 years as his housekeeper. That doesn't sound fine to me. Eleanor glanced at Robert, who was pretending to study documents while obviously listening. It's complicated. Talk to me. Is this guy taking advantage of you somehow? Because if he is, I swear I'll. Marcus, stop. Robert isn't taking advantage of me. If anything, I'm the one who insisted on representing him. Robert. You're calling him by his first name now. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. When had that shift happened? He's my client. He's your employer. Was your employer. I don't know what he is anymore, and I'm not sure you do either. Marcus's words hit closer to home than Eleanor wanted to admit. What was Robert to her now? Client? Former employer? Something else entirely? I have to go, she said. I'll call you later. After she hung up, Robert looked up from the documents. Your brother's worried about you. He's protective. He always has been, ever since our mother died. He thinks I'm taking advantage of you. Eleanor met his eyes directly. Are you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Robert set down his papers and moved closer, until they were sitting face to face on her small carpet. Eleanor, I need you to know something. What happened in that courtroom yesterday? It changed everything for me. Not just because you saved me, but because you forced me to see you. Really see you. And now that I have. Robert. Eleanor's voice was warning. I know this is complicated. I know the optics are terrible. I know that everyone will say you're a rebound from my divorce, or that I'm having some kind of midlife crisis, or that this is just gratitude confused with something else. Isn't it? Eleanor asked quietly. Robert reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her hand. I don't think so. Do you? Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, his pale and soft from a lifetime of privilege, hers darker and marked by years of work. The contrast should have reminded her of all the reasons this was impossible. Instead, it felt like completion. I think, she said carefully, that we have a case to win first. Everything else, we'll figure out later. Robert smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since this whole ordeal began. Deal. But Eleanor. Yes. Later is coming sooner than you think. 3 days into their intensive preparation, Eleanor's carefully constructed walls began to crack. She was reviewing witness statements at 2 a.m. when Robert found her crying over a legal brief, tears dropping onto pages of testimony about Gerald Hoffman's systematic theft. Eleanor? What's wrong? She quickly wiped her eyes, embarrassed by the display of vulnerability. I'm fine. Just tired. Robert sat beside her on the carpet, now as familiar with her floor as any piece of furniture. You're not fine. And after everything we've been through this week, I think we're past polite deflection. Eleanor stared at the legal documents scattered around them, evidence of betrayal, greed, and broken trust. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe it was the way Robert had seamlessly integrated into her world without judgment, but something inside her finally broke open. This case. It's bringing up things I thought I'd buried. What kind of things? Eleanor pulled her knees to her chest, making herself smaller. My mother worked as a domestic for a wealthy family in Chicago. The Ashfords. Old money like your family. She cleaned their house for 15 years, raised their children alongside me and Marcus. Robert waited, sensing there was more. When I was 17, their son, Preston Ashford, he was home from Harvard for Christmas break. Golden boy, heir to the family fortune. Eleanor's voice took on a bitter edge. He cornered me in the library one night while my mother was cleaning upstairs. Said he'd always been curious about the help's daughter. Robert's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. When I fought him off and ran, he claimed I'd tried to seduce him. Steal from the family. My mother and I were fired the next morning. No references, no severance. Mrs. Ashford called us both thieves and threatened to have us arrested if we ever came near their property again. Eleanor. My mother died 3 months later. The stress, the shame, the financial strain, it was too much for her heart. She was only 46. Eleanor's voice broke. I've spent 16 years believing that if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself worthy enough, I could somehow earn back what that family stole from us. Not just the job, but our dignity. Robert reached for her hand, but Eleanor pulled away. Don't you see? This case, standing up for you in that courtroom, it's not really about loyalty or justice. It's about me trying to rewrite history, trying to prove that people like us matter to people like you. That's not true, isn't it? Eleanor's eyes flashed with pain and anger. You're wealthy, powerful, connected. I'm the help who got uppity and thought she could play lawyer. How is this any different? Robert was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. Then he did something unexpected. He lay down on the carpet beside her, staring at the ceiling. My father wasn't born wealthy, he said quietly. He was the son of a janitor at Whitman Industries. Worked nights cleaning offices while he put himself through business school during the day. Eleanor glanced at him, surprised by this revelation. When he graduated, he applied for an entry-level position at the same company where he'd been mopping floors. The owner, Harrison Whitman, grandfather of my former lawyer, Charles, thought it was hilarious. A janitor's kid wanting to be an executive. He hired my father as a joke, gave him impossible assignments, expected him to fail. Robert's voice carried old pain. Instead, my father revolutionized their operations. Saved them millions. Within 5 years, he'd earned enough to buy out Whitman's share of the company. He renamed it Bennett Industries and built it into an empire. What happened to the Whitmans? They adapted. Started a law firm catering to the new rich, people like my father who needed legal representation but weren't accepted by the old money firms. It's ironic. Charles Whitman has spent his career serving people his grandfather wouldn't have allowed through the front door. Eleanor processed this information. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I've spent my whole life trying to be worthy of inherited wealth I didn't earn. My father died when I was 12, and I've been carrying the weight of his expectations ever since. The foundation, the philanthropy, it's all been me trying to prove I deserved what he built. Robert turned to face her. But here's what I realized this week, watching you work, seeing your mind dissect evidence and build strategies. Worthiness isn't about where you come from or how much money you have. It's about what you do when tested. And Eleanor, you've been tested your whole life, and you've passed every time. Eleanor felt tears threatening again. You don't understand the whole story. Then tell me. She took a shaky breath. After my mother died, I applied for a scholarship to Northwestern Law. Got in on academic merit. But the scholarship was funded by... She couldn't finish. The Ashford family, Robert guessed. Eleanor nodded. Their charitable foundation. I found out during orientation. The irony was crushing. Getting my law degree with money from the family that destroyed mine. I almost dropped out. But you didn't. No. I decided to take their money and use it to become everything they said I could never be. I graduated top of my class, passed the bar on the first try, got hired by Morrison & Associates, a small firm that specialized in employment law and civil rights cases. What changed? Why did you leave law to become? To become your housekeeper? Eleanor's laugh was hollow. Because Marcus got sick. Leukemia. No insurance, no savings. The treatment costs were astronomical. Morrison was a good firm, but small firm salaries don't cover cancer treatment for a 20-year-old. Robert's eyes widened with understanding. I needed money fast, and I needed a flexible schedule for hospital visits. Domestic work paid better than you'd think, especially for families like yours who value discretion and reliability. I told myself it was temporary, just until Marcus got better. But he did get better. Why didn't you go back to law? Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Because somewhere along the way, I realized I was happy. Your family was kind to me, Robert. Not like the Ashfords. You treated me with respect, even if you didn't really see me. And I got to watch your children grow up, help Mrs. Bennett through her difficulties, be part of something stable and good. You gave up your legal career to take care of people who were strangers to you. You weren't strangers. You were family. A different kind of family, but family nonetheless. They lay in silence, both processing the weight of what had been shared. Then Robert spoke again. There's something else you need to know. About Gerald Hoffman and why he was able to embezzle so much money. Eleanor turned to face him. What do you mean? 3 years ago, my accountant recommended Hoffman as our new foundation treasurer. Said he came highly recommended by the Ashford Foundation in Chicago. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. What? I did some digging yesterday while you were at the law library. Gerald Hoffman worked for the Ashfords for 12 years before coming to work for us. Preston Ashford personally recommended him. The implications hit Eleanor like a physical blow. You think this is connected to what happened with my family? I think it's too much of a coincidence. A man recommended by Preston Ashford systematically steals from my foundation, and the evidence is structured to implicate me specifically. Meanwhile, my legal team, the Whitman firm, abandons me at the crucial moment. Eleanor sat up, her legal mind racing. If Preston Ashford orchestrated this, if he's been planning some kind of revenge against your family, then this isn't just about stolen money. It's about destroying everything my father built, everything I've tried to honor. But why? What would Preston Ashford have against your family? Robert's expression darkened. Because 25 years ago, my father's foundation gave you a scholarship. And 6 months later, you filed a police report against Preston Ashford for attempted assault. Eleanor's world tilted. How could you possibly know that? Because my father kept files on every scholarship recipient. He believed in following up on his investments in people. When I read your file yesterday, I found a letter from my father to the Chicago police chief, offering to pay for additional investigation into your case. The police chief was Preston's golf buddy. The investigation was buried. Your father tried to help me? He tried to get you justice. When that failed, he made sure you got the best possible legal education. He wanted you to have the tools to fight back. Eleanor stared at Robert, pieces of a 16-year-old puzzle finally clicking into place. So this case is Preston Ashford's attempt to destroy both of us. You, because you dared to report him and succeed despite his efforts to ruin you. Me, because my father tried to help you and represented everything Preston's family had lost, the new money that displaced the old guard. We're not just fighting for your freedom, Eleanor realized. We're fighting the same battle my mother lost 16 years ago. Robert reached for her hand again, and this time she didn't pull away. Except this time, we're going to win. The revelation about Preston Ashford changed everything between Eleanor and Robert. What had been a professional partnership born of desperation transformed into something deeper, a shared mission that bridged the gap between their different worlds. Eleanor woke the next morning on Robert's living room couch, sunlight streaming through the tall windows she'd cleaned countless times but never truly appreciated from this angle. Robert was already awake, sitting in his armchair with 2 cups of coffee and a gentle smile that made her heart skip unexpectedly. "Good morning, counselor," he said, offering her a cup. "How did you sleep?" Better than I have in years, Eleanor admitted, accepting the coffee. It was perfect, exactly how she liked it, though she'd never told him her preference. How did you know I take cream and sugar? Robert's cheeks reddened slightly. I've been watching you make coffee for 12 years. I guess I picked up a few things. The simple admission hung between them, loaded with implications. Eleanor realized that while she'd thought herself invisible, Robert had been seeing her all along, not as a servant, but as a person worthy of attention and care. Robert, she began, then stopped. The formal Mr. Bennett felt wrong now, but his first name still felt strange on her tongue. It's okay, he said softly. We're equals in this. We always have been. I was just too blind to see it. They spent the morning reorganizing their case strategy with renewed purpose. Eleanor spread documents across the dining room table while Robert made breakfast, a role reversal that would have seemed impossible a week ago. She watched him crack eggs with the concentration of a man learning a new skill, his movements careful and deliberate. You don't have to cook for me, Eleanor protested when he placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast before her. I want to, Robert replied simply. When's the last time someone cooked for you? Eleanor couldn't remember. Even as a child, she'd been the one preparing meals for Marcus while their mother worked double shifts. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender, that it brought tears to her eyes. Hey, Robert said, sitting beside her with his own plate. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. That's just it. For the first time in 16 years, nothing feels wrong. They ate in comfortable silence, and Eleanor marveled at how natural this felt. The mansion's formal dining room, with its crystal chandelier and portraits of Robert's ancestors, had always intimidated her. Now it felt like sanctuary. Tell me about your dreams, Robert said suddenly. Before all this happened, before you had to take care of everyone else, what did you want? Eleanor set down her fork, considering. I wanted to be a civil rights attorney. I wanted to help people who couldn't help themselves, people like my mother who got crushed by systems designed to protect the powerful. You still could, Robert said. After we win this case, you'll have proven yourself in the highest profile courtroom in Manhattan. Any firm in the city would want you. I'm 34 years old, Robert. I've been out of practice for over a decade. So, my father was 35 when he bought out Whitman Industries. Age isn't the barrier. Fear is. Eleanor looked at him with new appreciation. When did you become so wise about overcoming fear? This week. Watching you face down Judge Calloway, seeing you stand up to prosecutors who've never lost a case, you've taught me what courage actually looks like. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Eleanor was reviewing witness testimonies when the doorbell chimed. Robert answered, returning with a young man Eleanor immediately recognized despite the years that had passed. Marcus! Eleanor gasped, rising from her papers. Her brother crossed the room in 3 strides and swept her into a bear hug that lifted her off the ground. At 26, Marcus had inherited their mother's height and warm brown eyes, but he carried himself with the confident bearing of someone who'd fought death and won. I saw the news coverage, Marcus said, setting her down but keeping his hands on her shoulders. My sister, the famous attorney taking on Manhattan's legal establishment. Mom would be so proud. How did you find me? I called the mansion, and Mrs. Bennett told me you were here. Marcus glanced around the elegant room with raised eyebrows. This is quite a change from the kitchen. Robert stepped forward, extending his hand. You must be Marcus. I'm Robert Bennett. Your sister has been saving your life. Marcus grinned, shaking Robert's hand. Yeah, that sounds like Eleanor. She's been saving people since she was 12 years old. Marcus, Eleanor warned, embarrassed. What? It's true. Marcus turned to Robert with the protective intensity of a younger brother who'd grown up watching his sister sacrifice everything for others. She gave up law school money to pay for my cancer treatment. Worked 3 jobs while I was sick. Slept in hospital chairs for months. I wouldn't be alive without her. I didn't know, Robert said quietly, looking at Eleanor with something approaching awe. She never tells people the important stuff, Marcus continued. Like how she tutored half our neighborhood kids through high school, or how she organized legal aid clinics on weekends during law school, or how she's been sending money to our old church in Chicago every month for the past 10 years to help other families in crisis. Eleanor's face burned with embarrassment. Marcus, stop. No, I won't stop. You've spent your whole life being invisible, Eleanor. It's time someone saw who you really are. Robert was staring at Eleanor as if seeing her for the first time. You've been practicing law all along, haven't you? The legal aid clinics, the tutoring, you never really stopped being an attorney. It wasn't the same thing, Eleanor protested. It was exactly the same thing, Robert said firmly. You were fighting for people who needed justice. The fact that you weren't getting paid for it makes it more impressive, not less. Marcus stayed for dinner, regaling them with stories from his work as a paramedic and updating Eleanor on friends from their old neighborhood. Robert listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about Marcus's work and their childhood. Eleanor watched the 2 men bond over shared stories of overcoming family expectations and finding their own paths, and felt a warmth she'd almost forgotten existed. I should get back to my hotel, Marcus finally said as evening shadows lengthened across the room. But Eleanor, I need you to know something. What? Watching you this week, seeing you in your element. This is who you were always meant to be. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. After Marcus left, Eleanor and Robert found themselves alone with a changed dynamic. The presence of her brother had stripped away the last vestiges of the employer-employee relationship that had defined them for 12 years. He's remarkable, Robert said as they settled back into their case preparation. You raised him well. I just did what needed to be done. Eleanor, you need to stop minimizing your achievements. Robert's voice carried gentle frustration. You've spent 12 years thinking you were just the housekeeper, but you've actually been the heart of our family. My children came to you with their problems, not their mother. My wife trusted you with her struggles. I relied on your judgment about everything from household staff to charity events. Eleanor felt tears threatening again. I never thought you noticed. I noticed everything. The way you hummed while you worked, how you always knew exactly what we needed before we asked. The gentle way you corrected my son's grammar without making him feel stupid. You've been taking care of all of us, and I never even said thank you. You didn't need to thank me. It was my job. No, Robert said firmly, moving closer to her on the couch. It was love. You loved us, and we were too privileged and self-absorbed to recognize it. The word hung between them, love. Eleanor felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling completely. For 12 years, she had indeed loved this family, but had never allowed herself to acknowledge the depth of her feelings for the man now sitting beside her. Robert, she whispered, his name finally feeling natural on her lips. I know, he said softly. I feel it too. When he reached for her hand this time, she didn't pull away. Instead, she interlaced their fingers and marveled at how perfectly they fit together. This is complicated, she said. Everything worthwhile is complicated. What happens after the trial? Win or lose, everything changes. Robert brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then we figure it out together. All I know is that I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore. Not as my housekeeper, but as my partner. My equal. You're what? The woman I'm falling in love with. Eleanor's breath caught. The word she'd never allowed herself to hope for hung in the air between them, transforming everything. Outside, Manhattan glittered with evening lights, but inside Robert's living room, Eleanor Thompson finally allowed herself to believe that love could transcend the boundaries that had defined her entire life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in their fight for justice, but tonight, for the first time in years, Eleanor felt truly home. The morning of December 15th arrived with a bitter cold that seemed to seep through the mansion's walls. Eleanor woke in Robert's guest bedroom. They had agreed to maintain some boundaries despite their growing feelings, to find frost covering the windows in intricate patterns that reminded her of broken glass. She found Robert in his study, surrounded by newspapers spread across his mahogany desk like accusations. The headlines screamed variations of the same theme: Billionaire's Housekeeper, Love Affair or Legal Strategy, and From Maid to Lawyer, The Ultimate Gold Digger? "Don't read them," Robert said without looking up, his voice hollow with exhaustion. But Eleanor was already scanning the articles, each word a knife twist to her heart. The New York Post had somehow obtained photos of her and Robert holding hands on his terrace, twisted into a narrative of manipulation and opportunism. The Daily News quoted sources close to the Bennett family, suggesting that Eleanor had been planning this for years, biding her time until she could exploit Robert's vulnerability. How did they get these pictures? Eleanor whispered, recognizing the angle, taken from the building across the street, probably with a telephoto lens. "Does it matter?" Robert's voice carried a bitterness she'd never heard before. "The damage is done." Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Sis, what the hell is going on? Mom's old neighbors are calling asking if you've lost your mind. Call me." Then another from her former law school study partner. "Eleanor, I hope you know what you're doing. This doesn't look good." And another from Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman she'd been helping with housing issues. "Dear, I hope those newspaper stories aren't true. I thought better of you." Each message felt like a betrayal, confirmation that the world saw exactly what she'd always feared they would see: a scheming woman using a man's desperation for her own gain. "I should go," Eleanor said quietly, setting down her phone. "Go where?" "Home. Back to my life. This was a mistake." Robert finally looked up, his green eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "A mistake?" "Eleanor, we're 3 days away from the biggest breakthrough in this case. You can't abandon me now." The word abandon hit her like a slap. "Is that what you think this is? Me abandoning you? What else would you call it?" Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. After everything they'd shared, every moment of vulnerability and connection, he still saw her as someone who might walk away when things got difficult. "I would call it protecting both of us from further humiliation," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. The study door burst open without warning. Catherine Bennett swept in wearing a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than Eleanor's annual salary, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the morning light. Robert's wife of 22 years had always been beautiful in the way that money could buy and maintain, but today she looked like an ice sculpture, cold, flawless, and untouchable. "Catherine," Robert stood abruptly. "What are you doing here?" "Damage control," Catherine replied crisply, not even glancing at Eleanor. "Do you have any idea what this scandal is doing to our family's reputation? Charlotte called me crying from her dorm at Yale. She's mortified that her father is being portrayed as a fool seduced by the help." "Don't speak about Eleanor that way," Robert warned. Catherine finally turned her gaze to Eleanor, and her blue eyes were arctic. "Oh, I'm sorry. Should I call her something else? Your legal counsel? Your girlfriend? Your midlife crisis?" "Catherine, stop." "No, Robert, I won't stop. For 22 years, I've stood by you through every business scandal, every family crisis, every moment when your idealistic philanthropy made us targets for criticism. But this..." She gestured dismissively at Eleanor. "This is where I draw the line." Eleanor felt something inside her fracture. She'd known this moment would come, the moment when Robert would have to choose between his established life and their fragile new connection. She just hoped it would happen later, after they'd had time to build something strong enough to withstand the assault. "I've spoken with the district attorney," Catherine continued, pulling out her phone and scrolling through messages. "If you plead guilty to reduced charges, they'll recommend minimal prison time. You can serve 6 months, pay restitution, and we can begin rebuilding our reputation." "Absolutely not," Robert said firmly. "I won't plead guilty to crimes I didn't commit." "Then you're a fool," Catherine snapped. "And if you continue this charade with her," she pointed at Eleanor, "you'll be a fool facing these charges alone. I'm filing for separation, Robert. I've already moved my things out." The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor watched Robert's face cycle through shock, hurt, and finally, resignation. This was what she'd been afraid of, that loving her would cost him everything else. "Mrs. Bennett," Eleanor said quietly, "if I may." "You may not," Catherine cut her off. "You've done quite enough damage already." Eleanor's temper flared. For 12 years, she'd bitten her tongue, accepted disrespect, allowed herself to be treated as invisible. But not today. Not when her integrity was being questioned. "With respect, Mrs. Bennett, the only damage here is what you and your husband's former legal team have created by caring more about appearances than truth." Catherine's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. "How dare you? How dare I what? Fight for justice? Use my education to help someone I care about? Or how dare I fall in love with a man who's shown me more respect in 2 weeks than his own family has in 12 years? The admission hung in the air like a bomb. Eleanor had said it, the words that made everything real and terrifying. Robert stared at her, something shifting in his expression. "Eleanor." But Catherine's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Love. Oh, my dear, is that what you call this? How convenient that your love surfaced just when Robert needed someone desperate enough to represent him for free." The accusation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. All her deepest fears about how the world would interpret her feelings crystallized in Catherine's mocking tone. "That's not," Eleanor started, but Catherine wasn't finished. "I've had you investigated, dear. Did you think I wouldn't? Dropped out of Columbia Law after 1 year. Couldn't even finish what you started. Working as domestic help for over a decade. Sending money to that brother of yours. Tell me, how much debt are you in? How much were you hoping Robert's gratitude might be worth?" Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Every sacrifice she'd made, every choice to put family before ambition, twisted into evidence of greed and manipulation. "Catherine, enough," Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it true?" he asked Eleanor, and she heard the doubt creeping into his tone. "About Columbia Law School?" Eleanor met his eyes, seeing the man she'd fallen in love with warring with the billionaire who'd been trained to suspect everyone's motives. "Yes, it's true. I dropped out after my first year when Marcus was diagnosed with cancer." "And you never told me? When would I have told you? During the 12 years when you never asked about my background? Or during the past 2 weeks when I was too busy saving your life to provide my complete academic transcript?" Robert flinched at the accusation, but Catherine pressed her advantage. "You see, Robert, she's been lying by omission from the beginning. How do you know she's not working with whoever really stole that money? The perfect inside woman, someone who's been in our home for years, observing, planning." "Stop." Eleanor's voice cut through Catherine's speculation like a blade. "Just stop." She looked between Robert and Catherine, seeing doubt bloom in Robert's eyes like poison. After everything they'd shared, every moment of connection and vulnerability, He was actually considering his wife's accusations. "You want to know the truth?" Eleanor's voice was steady now, strengthened by righteous anger. "The truth is that I have loved this family for 12 years, despite being treated like furniture. I sacrificed my education to save my brother's life, and I'd make the same choice again. I've worked 16-hour days to keep your household running smoothly, listened to your children's problems, covered for your wife's prescription drug issues, and maintained your family's secrets with absolute loyalty." Robert's face went pale. "Eleanor, don't. No, I'm done protecting people who won't protect me." She turned to Catherine. "You want to question my motives? Fine. But don't you dare question my character or my love for your husband. I stood up in that courtroom because I believe in justice, not because I wanted anything from him." Catherine's smile was triumphant. "Then prove it. Walk away. If you really love him, you'll leave before you destroy what's left of his reputation." Eleanor felt her heart shatter completely. The woman she'd served faithfully for over a decade was asking her to abandon the man she loved to save him from the scandal of loving her back. She looked at Robert, waiting for him to defend her, to choose her, to prove that their love was worth fighting for. But Robert remained silent, his face a mask of conflicted uncertainty. In that silence, Eleanor found her answer. "You're right," she said quietly, removing the case files from her bag and placing them on Robert's desk. "I should go." As she walked toward the door, Eleanor heard Robert call her name, but she didn't turn around. Some wounds went too deep for words to heal. 3 days passed in a haze of regret and silence. Eleanor returned to her Harlem apartment, but the space felt foreign after weeks of living in Robert's world. She sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the Columbia Law School alumni magazine that had arrived in her mail, a cruel reminder of the path not taken, the dream deferred. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, but she ignored them all. The only call she answered was from Marcus. "Eleanor, what the hell happened?" His voice carried across the miles from Chicago, filled with protective anger. "I've been reading these articles, and they're destroying you. Do you want me to come to New York?" "No, Marcus. I'm fine." "You're not fine. I can hear it in your voice. Talk to me, sis." Eleanor closed her eyes, remembering the little boy she'd raised, the man whose life she'd saved by sacrificing her own dreams. "I fell in love with the wrong man at the wrong time." "The billionaire." "Eleanor, you've been working for his family for 12 years. How is this sudden?" "It's not sudden. I think I've been in love with him for years. I just never let myself acknowledge it until he needed me." She laughed bitterly. "Pathetic, right? Not pathetic. Human." Marcus's voice softened. "But Eleanor, you've spent your whole life taking care of other people. When do you get to be taken care of?" The question hit her like a revelation. When had she ever allowed herself to be vulnerable, to need someone else? Meanwhile, across town in the mansion's study, Robert sat surrounded by empty coffee cups and legal documents, but his mind wasn't on his upcoming trial. It was on the look in Eleanor's eyes when she'd walked away, hurt so deep it had physically made him ache. Catherine had moved back into the house after Eleanor left, sleeping in their master bedroom as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Robert found himself unable to look at his wife without remembering how casually she'd dismantled Eleanor's character, how easily she'd twisted 12 years of loyalty into manipulation. "Are you going to sulk forever?" Catherine asked from the doorway, perfectly dressed for lunch at the country club. "I'm preparing for my trial." "Your trial that you're going to lose because you let your emotions cloud your judgment." Catherine entered the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "Robert, I've been thinking. Perhaps we can work this out. You plead to reduce charges, serve minimal time, and when you're released, we'll renew our vows." Show the world that our marriage survived this temporary insanity." Robert looked up at his wife, really looked at her, and realized that he was seeing a stranger. Temporary insanity? Your infatuation with the help. It's understandable, really. You were under tremendous stress, vulnerable, and she took advantage. Stop. Robert's voice was quiet but firm. Don't talk about Eleanor that way. Catherine's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. Are you still defending her? After she abandoned you? She didn't abandon me. I let you drive her away. I saved you from making the biggest mistake of your life. Robert stood slowly, and for the first time in their 22-year marriage, Catherine took a step back at something she saw in his expression. No, Catherine. The biggest mistake of my life was spending 22 years married to someone who could destroy a good person's reputation to protect her social standing. Robert, I want a divorce. The words hung between them like a chasm. Catherine's composed facade finally cracked completely, revealing something desperate underneath. You can't be serious. You're throwing away our entire life for a housekeeper. I'm ending a marriage that should have ended years ago for a woman who showed me what real love looks like. That evening, Robert found himself standing outside Eleanor's apartment building in Harlem, holding a manila envelope and fighting every instinct that told him he didn't belong in this neighborhood, on this doorstep, in this moment of complete vulnerability. He pressed her buzzer. Yes. Her voice through the intercom was carefully neutral. Eleanor, it's Robert. Please. I need to talk to you. Silence stretched for so long he thought she might ignore him. Then the door buzzed open. Eleanor waited in her doorway wearing a simple gray sweater and jeans, her hair loose around her shoulders. Without the armor of her professional attire, she looked younger, more vulnerable, and absolutely beautiful. What are you doing here? She asked. I came to apologize. And to ask you to come back. Robert, Catherine and I are getting divorced. Eleanor's expression didn't change. That doesn't fix anything. I know. But it's a start. He held out the envelope. These are the real financial records from the foundation. I found them in my father's old safe. He kept backup copies of everything. They prove my innocence, but more importantly, they reveal who's actually been stealing from the foundation. Eleanor accepted the envelope but didn't open it. Who? Charles Whitman. My former lead attorney. He's been skimming money for 3 years, using his access to foundation accounts. When the investigation started getting close, he decided to let me take the fall rather than face exposure. Eleanor's eyes widened as the implications sank in. Robert, this changes everything. We need to get this to the district attorney immediately. I mean you need to. Eleanor. Robert stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. I've been an idiot. When Catherine started making accusations, when doubt crept in, I should have trusted what I knew about you instead of listening to fear. You had every right to doubt. What Catherine said wasn't entirely wrong. I did drop out of law school. I have been struggling financially. And you're the most honorable person I've ever known. Robert's voice was intense with conviction. You sacrificed your dreams to save your brother's life. You spent 12 years serving my family with absolute loyalty. You stood up in that courtroom when everyone else abandoned me. Catherine wasn't wrong about the facts, Eleanor. She was wrong about what they meant. Tears gathered in Eleanor's eyes. I'm scared, Robert. I'm scared that if I let myself believe in this, in us, it'll all fall apart again. Then we'll build it stronger this time. Together. He reached for her hands, and she didn't pull away. Eleanor Thompson, you are brilliant, brave, loyal, and beautiful. You've seen me at my worst and chose to stand by me anyway. I love you. Not because you saved my reputation or my freedom, but because you saved me from becoming someone I wouldn't recognize. I love you too, she whispered. I think I've loved you for years. Then come back. Help me finish this fight. Be my partner, not just my attorney. Eleanor looked down at the envelope in her hands, evidence that would clear the man she loved and bring justice to those who tried to destroy him. She thought about her mother's words. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply show up. Okay, she said. But we do this right. No more hiding. No more pretending this is just professional. If we're going to be partners, we're going to be real partners. Robert's smile was radiant. Are you proposing to me, counselor? Eleanor laughed, the sound bright and free. I'm proposing that we stop being afraid of what people think and start fighting for what we believe in. I accept your proposal, Robert said, pulling her into his arms. All of it. As they held each other in the doorway of her small apartment, both of them knew that the real battle was just beginning. But for the first time in days, they were ready to face it together. The next morning, they would walk into that courthouse hand in hand, armed with truth and united by love. But tonight, they simply held each other and remembered what it felt like to be chosen, to be loved, to be home. 1 year later, the same Manhattan courthouse where Eleanor had first declared, "I will stand for him," now buzzed with a different energy. Today wasn't about criminal trials or desperate last stands. Today was about celebration, vindication, and new beginnings. Eleanor stood before the mirror in the courthouse's private conference room, adjusting the collar of her navy blue suit. The same suit she'd worn that fateful day 12 months ago, but everything else had changed. Her hair was styled in elegant waves that framed her face, and the diamond engagement ring on her left hand caught the December sunlight streaming through the windows. You ready for this, counselor? Robert asked from behind her, his reflection joining hers in the mirror. He wore a charcoal gray suit that complemented her navy, and his green eyes sparkled with the contentment of a man who had found his true home. I've been ready for this my whole life, Eleanor replied, turning to face him. I just didn't know it. They were here for the final hearing in the Charles Whitman case. The evidence Eleanor and Robert had uncovered had led to a federal investigation that revealed a web of corruption spanning multiple law firms and charitable organizations. Whitman had pleaded guilty to embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy charges just last week, accepting a 12-year prison sentence in exchange for his cooperation in exposing the larger scheme. But more than legal vindication awaited them today. In 30 minutes, Judge Patricia Calloway would perform their wedding ceremony in the same courtroom where their love story had truly begun. A soft knock interrupted their moment. Marcus Thompson entered, looking distinguished in his dress uniform. He'd taken leave from his Chicago paramedic job to walk his sister down the aisle. You two ready to make this official? He asked, his grin wide with joy. Eleanor had been nervous about introducing Marcus to Robert, worried about the class differences, the cultural gaps. But the two men had bonded immediately over their shared devotion to Eleanor and their mutual respect for hard work and integrity. Marcus had even been the one to suggest they hold the wedding in the courthouse. She saved your life in this room, Marcus had told Robert. Seems fitting that you'd start your life together here too. Now, as the three of them prepared to enter the courtroom, Eleanor felt overwhelmed by gratitude. Her brother was here, healthy and proud. The man she loved stood beside her, no longer hiding their relationship from the world. And in just a few moments, she would become Mrs. Eleanor Bennett, not because she was trading her identity for security, but because she was choosing to build a future with someone who saw her true worth. Mrs. Bennett, Robert said softly, testing the sound of her new name. I like how that sounds. I like how it feels, Eleanor replied. The courtroom was intimate rather than packed. Robert's children, Caroline and Matthew, sat in the front row, their initial shock at their father's choice having evolved into genuine affection for Eleanor. They'd spent the past year getting to know the woman who had been part of their household for so long, but whom they'd never really seen. Behind them sat a carefully chosen group of friends and family. Eleanor's former Columbia Law School roommate had flown in from California. Several members of the Bennett Foundation's board attended, along with the teachers and students from the schools the foundation supported. People whose lives had been touched by Robert's genuine philanthropy. Judge Calloway entered wearing her formal robes, her expression warm but official. At 72, she had presided over thousands of cases, but this wedding held special meaning. She had witnessed the moment when Eleanor's courage had changed everything. "When I agreed to perform the ceremony," Judge Calloway began, "I did so because I've rarely seen such a powerful demonstration of love, loyalty, and moral courage as I witnessed in this courtroom 1 year ago. Eleanor Thompson, soon to be Eleanor Bennett, you reminded all of us that true character isn't about wealth or status, but about standing up for what's right, especially when it's difficult." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes as the judge continued. "Robert Bennett, you learned that love isn't about being comfortable or maintaining appearances. It's about recognizing worth in unexpected places and having the courage to fight for what matters most." The ceremony was simple but profound. When they exchanged vows, Eleanor's voice was strong and clear. "Robert, you taught me that dreams deferred are not dreams denied. You showed me that love doesn't diminish us. It reveals who we truly are. I promise to stand by you not just in crisis, but in joy, in growth, in the quiet moments that make a life." Robert's vows brought tears to more than one set of eyes. "Eleanor, you saved my life in ways I'm still discovering. You showed me that real strength comes from service, that wisdom comes from sacrifice, and that love, true love, sees past everything superficial to the heart of who we are. I promise to spend the rest of my life proving worthy of your faith in me." When Judge Calloway pronounced them husband and wife, the courtroom erupted in applause. Robert kissed Eleanor with gentle reverence, and she could taste the salt of happy tears, his or hers, she couldn't tell. As they walked back down the aisle together, Eleanor's eyes found the exact spot where she had stood 1 year ago, terrified but determined, and declared her intention to fight for this man. The scared young woman who had surprised herself with her own courage felt like a different person now. Not because she'd changed fundamentally, but because she'd finally been seen for who she truly was. The reception was held at the Rainbow Room, high above Manhattan's glittering streets. As evening fell and the city lights twinkled below them, Eleanor and Robert shared their first dance as husband and wife to Etta James, at last. "No regrets," Robert murmured against her ear as they swayed together. Eleanor pulled back to look at him, this man who had been part of her daily life for 12 years, but whom she was still discovering. "Only one." His face showed concern. "What's that?" "I regret that it took us so long to find each other." Robert's smile was radiant. "We found each other exactly when we were supposed to. Any earlier, and we might not have been ready." As midnight approached and the celebration wound down, Eleanor stood by the windows looking out at Central Park below. The same park she'd gazed at from the Bennett kitchen window thousands of times, wondering what her life might become. Robert joined her, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Bennett?" "About that little girl from Harlem who used to ride her bike past this building and dream about what it would be like to live in a world like this. She never imagined she'd belong here because someone chose to love her exactly as she was." "You've always belonged here, Eleanor. It just took the rest of us a while to recognize it." Eleanor leaned back against her husband's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Tomorrow they would start their new life together. Not as employer and employee, not as classes divided, but as partners in every sense of the word. Eleanor would continue practicing law, taking on cases for those who needed strong advocates. Robert would rebuild the foundation with new safeguards and Eleanor as his co-director. But tonight, they were simply two people who had found their way to love through loyalty, courage, and the willingness to see past society's expectations to the truth of their hearts. "I love you, Robert Bennett," Eleanor whispered. "I love you too, Eleanor Bennett. Forever." Outside, snow began to fall on the city where a housekeeper's courage had transformed into a love story that would inspire them both for the rest of their lives. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply show up. And sometimes, showing up changes everything. Love finds a way when we have the courage to stand up for what's right. Eleanor's journey from invisible housekeeper to beloved partner proves that true worth isn't about where you start, but about the strength of your character. What moment in your life required you to stand up and be counted? Share your story in the comments, like this video if it touched your heart, and subscribe for more incredible true stories that remind us that love always wins in the end. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.